So I'm welcoming all of our viewers to this episode here. It's a really fascinating episode for me. I'm really excited to have James here from SkyWatch because, and I think you all should be as well, because anyone who is interested in new space or works in new space, especially Earth observation, I really think that Skywatch is a story you should care about. Um, because as far as I can see, about our industry and about Skywatch, I believe that they are really working to answer probably some of the most important questions about our industry. And I would even go as far to say that the story of Skywatch pretty much is a mirror of the story of new space, especially Earth observation. So we'll get more into what that means. But first, I want to welcome James to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have you. So I think we should just start kind of chronologically and just get to the beginning of the Skywatch origin. And like, let's tell that story real quick, because I know that basically this, and I think the jumping off point could be when you basically decided to stop doing college and start learning how to code, I believe. And is that true? And let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a small town, so my dad has a machine shop, and that's where I worked growing up. And one of the things you do as the firstborn in a small town is you go to school and you take over your parents' business, take over the family business. So I left my small town, went to the big city of Toronto, went to business school, and was exposed pretty quickly to all of the options in the world that existed outside of my small town, and that included the emerging tech scene in Toronto, as well as like the emerging globally the commercial space scene, or what was becoming the commercialization of space.
Mm-hmm.
And left school, even though I had the highest GPA in the school for 2 years in a row, ended up leaving it because there's only so much you can read about business before you just like, I want to just hop into business and get some real world experience. And I wanted to learn how to build software. There was a point in time where I realized my development was progressing faster outside of school than it was inside of school. And I'm a person who cares about, maximizing my time, being productive, but also furthering my capabilities and my skill sets as fast as I can and as far as I can. And once I realized I was able to do that in a different environment than the environment I was in, I made that switch pretty quickly, and spent a few years learning how to build software to the point where we were able to build software using NASA's open data sets, enabling some of the world's most prolific astrophysicists with the ability to get data from NASA's space observatories. And that was actually that software was called SkyWatch at the time. And as I've said many times since, there is it's not really too much of a business to be built in astrophysics. Building software in astrophysics is a labor of love. And astrophysics is and was a large passion of mine. I always say I've always been a space nerd, but not necessarily like your typical sci-fi space nerd. I've always just been fascinated with our study of the cosmos, and astrophysics is obviously a large part of that. Just been fascinated with what exists beyond Earth, and also the fundamental questions of how did we get here, and what's the purpose of life, and what does it mean to live a good life, and a fulfilling life. And so that's sort of how I became fascinated with space a little bit more broadly. And so once we were able to learn how to build software, and I realized that I could build software in the space industry, sort of poured my heart and soul into it. And this was about 8 or 9 years ago now, and we ended up winning a competition that NASA was hosting that year in 2014 for the software that we had built for what was called SkyWatch, and that really garnered us a lot of media attention. It garnered us investor attention, and like any good entrepreneur, we capitalized on the moment. We seized the opportunity that was given to us, and we really looked at the landscape, the broader space tech landscape. So this is 2014, and it's really funny because I tell entrepreneurs today, and as you know, everybody's starting a space tech company. The amount of space tech companies that are being started on a weekly or monthly basis right now is incredible to see. But in 2014, I thought it was late to the market, which is really funny to think about in retrospect. Extremely funny to think about in retrospect. But I thought it was late to the market, and because companies were raising tens of millions of dollars, in SpaceX's case, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were all proposing to build interesting businesses that put hardware up into space to gather information about our planet. And I probably don't need to reiterate the reasons why that was happening, but costs are coming down in terms of your ability to launch your object, the mass that you need to put into space, as well as the form factors themselves are increasingly getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you could raise a seed fund and be a space technology company, which is just such a fundamental shift and really opened up the market for the amount of participants and the amount of companies that were proposing to put something into space. And what was pretty obvious at the time is that none of these companies really understood how they were going to get their data or their services out to the market.
Right.
There was very much a build it and they will come mentality. And this is because from a legacy perspective, this is traditionally how we built space technology companies. We utilize the government as an anchor customer, right? They fund the original mission. We get the asset into space. We can build a profitable company with the government as a customer alone. And so there's never really any strong incentives to figure out how to explore and build a commercial go-to-market plan, right? And then what happened is, as venture capital and private equity came into the space industry, it really replaced the government in a sense from a funding mechanism. Companies, rather than pursuing government as an anchor customer, pursued VC and pursued private equity as a anchor source of funding to get their original missions into space. However, you use that, you get into space, sure, but now you have this problem because you don't have that contracted revenue that you would have had if you had the government as your anchor original customer. So it actually became more important for companies to figure out how they were going to figure out their distribution, how they were going to get their products and services out to market. But I think it was a blind spot for a lot of them because a lot of us were trapped in our old thinking around how space technology companies built their technology and how they got their technology to market. And that was really where our vision, Earth observation, and our entrance into the Earth observation market was spawned. It was realizing naively that the problem was fairly similar to the problem that we solved in astrophysics. We thought, like, if you just turn the cameras around 180 degrees and pointed them at Earth, it's the same problem we already solved in astrophysics. The truth is far more nuanced than that. Very, very different beast. But I always say, like, you need to be naive to start a very large and ambitious company, anyways. So that was where we were naive, is thinking it was similar to a problem we've already solved. But nonetheless, it gave us the motivation and the inspiration to jump into that problem and try to solve it. And, we can talk about the journey since then, but here we are 7 years later. And to your point, we've been along that journey from the get-go, much in terms of the new space version of Earth observation, and the modern Earth observation market. And I like to think that we're now leading and on the cutting edge and on the bleeding edge of where Earth observation is going over the next decade.
Well, I'll humbly say that I agree with you there. Thank you for sharing that. Can we touch a little bit, like, because I want to draw some similarities actually, because we have a similar origin story at Ellipsis Drive where like data products was kind of our first focus. And I know that one of the first things the SkyWatch team, and I think a lot of our audience might connect with this, is like one of the first things the SkyWatch team sunk its teeth into was a crop monitoring model of some sort, and a data product in that sense. I think it was to do with carbon emissions and how it affects crops, if I remember. Can you just
Correct.
touch on that a little bit? Because I think that really illustrates the discovery of this problem that SkyWatch encountered, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of an it's sort of ironic that we tried to build a what I would like to describe as an end user solution. So the problem that we tried to solve for, at least I would describe. So yeah, the problem that we tried to solve for, you got mostly right, was we were trying to understand the impact that greenhouse gases were having on crop yields. So we were trying to figure out, particularly in areas of high pollution where there's large metropolises and large populated areas, we're trying to figure out how the pollution and the greenhouse gases coming from those populations were impacting agriculture within a certain radius. And we were doing this, I would say we were experimenting with this problem largely because at the time it was popular in Earth observation to build an analytical solution. You know, we're talking about the early days where Orbital Eye and not Orbital Eye, although they're awesome companies that we love, Orbital Insights and Descartes Labs were raising large volumes of capital to build analytical solutions leveraging EO amongst other geospatial data sets. And we figured that's what you had to do to raise capital. I guess we didn't have the confidence in ourselves yet to sort of go against the grain, although we eventually did. But we did start experimenting with this type of an analytical solution.
Right.
And I've said this before, you know, what kind of led us upstream, up the value chain to the distribution layer was that 90% of our work and effort was finding the data, accessing the data, cleaning the data, and only 10% of the work was actually building up the model.
Right.
And we're for the most part data experts. And so the fact that it took that long to do that work for us was a signal that there wasn't a chance that every corporation in the world was going to be able to benefit from this data if it remained as difficult to access as it did. And so that was the impetus that gave us the confidence to move upstream and realize that the distribution layer, or the lack of a distribution layer in Earth observation, was the thing that we needed to build. And we were the first company in the history of the industry to propose the distribution layer. Like the business model was, other than like your traditional reseller networks, the business model at the time was the satellite operators sold directly to their end users, and then what became popular mid-decade was satellite operators would partner with these analytical companies to sell solutions to end users. But there was like no concept of a distribution layer until SkyWatch proposed one in 2015, 2016.
Very yeah, and basically it's a similar well, thank you for like detailing that out, because it is like important for people to kind of hear that. I mean, I think that it does kind of mirror the Ellipsis Drive story, where our founding team was focused on data products and and creating frameworks to help make data products with EO data. And basically bumped into the issue that it's really hard to access that data, first of all, which is that layer you're talking about. So yeah, and of course, a lot of that infrastructure just wasn't there, and it makes it so hard to connect operators to to buyers, basically, satellite operators to people who are going to buy the data, which is really, we're starting to tease out that big question. It's like, this is the connection between Earth and space. And yeah, that's what this story is all about, I believe. And
And you
so,
guys, I would add that you guys tackle an important part down the value chain from us, which what we have recognized as being a really challenging part of serving data out to the market, which is just like, once you've served this data into an enterprise or into an organization, how is that data managed, shared, and it's trying to find the right word for it, but it is a disaster in most cases. Like in most like, they're definitely not managing the most companies in the world, most customers in the world, and satellite operators will either agree with this or cringe at this. But most consumers of satellite data do not organize or manage their data in a way that is fully compliant with the licensing that they've agreed to use that they've agreed to in using that data, which is sort of where these solutions, I think, really play a large role amongst many other needs within the organization. So it's like, and I think just having this conversation, most people wouldn't have fathomed in our industry this conversation 5 or 6 years ago, because there was no concept of a value chain in Earth observation. Like you as a satellite company did everything. Right? And it's so interesting that we're having such a nuanced conversation about the value chain of Earth observation. Because like these concepts, the SkyWatch concept, the Ellipsis Drive concept, they did not exist. And they weren't, well, they didn't have any credibility in our industry 4 or 5 years ago. So it's fascinating to see the evolution here.
Yeah, it really is. And like, it makes me think about, like, it's almost like, as we innovate as humans and we open up these new frontiers, we have to relearn like these fundamentals, where it's like, we knew we know that you have to specialize to create prosperity, right? So like, that's it takes a village, I think. And so yeah, doing everything yourself is not very efficient, right? So but here we are in the new frontier, and it's like, okay, we realize that specializing for these moving parts is what the industry needs to really like deliver that value at the end of the day. So yeah.
On that note, like what I've learned in building this company in this particular industry will serve as the thesis of a business book I hope to write one day. But it's on that. So it's on really the basis on how new markets are born, and then how they emerge, and eventually how they mature. And what ends up happening is when you start a business in a new market, by definition, it's a new market, so a value chain doesn't exist. So what you have to do to grow that market is you have to build everything in the value chain to build out the market, right? So first movers into a new market they have to fully verticalize, because that's the only way you realize the full value proposition. And then what happens is people look at that value chain and say, oh, awesome, they've proven out the market, but there's a more efficient way to do this in little parts of that value chain. And they start to disintermediate that verticalization. And then that's how a value chain emerges in the market, right? And then what happens is, if the original incumbents and the original first entrants into the market, the verticalized players, if they don't adopt to that new value chain, that's where they die, because their cost structure all of a sudden is antiquated to the cost structure today, because new companies come in and they build their company on top of that new value chain, right? So now they don't have to hold the cost structure of that value chain on their balance sheet or in their operating costs, right? They leverage everyone else's specializations, and they build a more efficient business. And then that's how the market grows even further. That's sort of like the next step function in growth in a market, which is I think what we're seeing now in Earth observation. The disintermediation of verticalization, and the rise of specializations along that value chain, which is allowing us to serve better solutions to the end market, which are also more affordable solutions.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great description. I'm really glad you shared that. Because it's just like it's just the type of insight I was hoping we could get out of you, because I really think being a connector of the supply side and the demand side, basically, of Earth observation data, that really is, you're looking at the full value chain, and you have a unique position to really see where things are. And then I also, yeah, that description of how the early movers have to basically create the market and prove that there's kind of value to be had. And then people can come in, new companies can come in and say, okay, we'll take this piece, we'll take this piece. That's really cool. Yeah, very, very cool. So
Totally. And
yeah,
a company, if you think about how much capital a company like Planet had to raise to be successful, right? We're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And they had to do that because they had to invest in a lot of infrastructure that didn't exist in the ecosystem, right? But never again will you have to raise that amount of capital to build a similar business. Never again, because you will use SkyWatch for distribution. You will maybe use a satellite bus provider to put your hosted payload on there. You might even buy your payload off the shelf. Who knows? You'll use AWS Ground Station or Microsoft Azure Orbital as your ground infrastructure. You'll ensure that all your customers have Ellipsis Drive so that they can easily manage that data once it's in its organization. And you don't have to build all that stuff now. So the next generation of satellite companies and satellite operators in EO have such a huge advantage ahead of them, because they don't need that amount of capital to build a similar business, and they can move faster with better products and services, and focus on building profitable businesses using the existing value chain. It's going to be a really exciting next 4 or 5 years.
I love that. So great. Let's look in now. Let's sort of double click here and take a look at our take a look at SkyWatch, and just let's cover TerraStream and sort of what are the tools you're giving to operators, because and I guess we haven't kind of framed this quite yet, but basically SkyWatch fundamentally is connecting operators and the people who have satellites in space with the buyers, and that's a platform business. So yeah, let's just double click on TerraStream and explain that.
Yeah, so it all starts with Earth Cache. Earth Cache, the hardest part about building Earth Cache and serving our customers is the difficulty we have in integrating with our satellite operator systems and their infrastructure. It is primarily the cause of user experience challenges and failed deliveries to our customer base. And at the end of the day, when we look at where this market is going, to the conversation, this ties into the conversation we just had about the value chain. But if you're going to build a modern Earth observation company, it's just table stakes that you need to be able to manage your data and get it out to market efficiently. And so this is what we call now an area of undifferentiated heavy lifting, which is to say, it's now just it's now just an expensive thing you need to do in your business to go to market. And the analogy I always use is the transition we made in the technology sector over the last 20 years from being predominantly building our companies using on-prem servers and data storage to transitioning to the cloud. The reason why cloud companies are so valuable is they take away from a company like ours all of the investments we would have had to made into something that is just like a heavy cost of running a business, but doesn't give us any differentiation. It gives us no to put it another way, it would give SkyWatch no competitive advantage in the world to host, to manage our own servers and our own data storage facilities inside of our building, right? In fact, now today, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. And you're going to see that transition now in the EO space. It is going to go from having been an advantage because you have to build your own data platform and distribution capabilities to a disadvantage if you try to build it yourself, rather than using a world-class solution that everybody else is using. And so we recognize this far in advance of the market sort of moving in this direction, and realized we wanted to build the solution that enabled these satellite operators, that part of the value chain, for them not have to build it themselves. And that was the impetus of that was sort of the birth of Terrestream. That's sort of what led to the idea that this is something that we could build and move upstream into the stack for. Now, there's a lot of I would say, if you're skeptical about the strategy, what you would say is, well, why would a satellite company ever relinquish like control of their data? And the truth is that they don't. So with Terrestream, for example, what Terrestream is not a shared platform. You know, like if you use a traditional SaaS software, you might be using the same, like you're using the same servers and the same infrastructure as every other every other of the customers that are using that same SaaS platform. With Terrestream, we actually spin up Terrestream in your own AWS account and then hand you over the keys. So you actually own the data storage, like on AWS, the S3 bucket, and then the file storage equivalent in Microsoft. You actually own all of that infrastructure. We're just spinning it up for you, and then we're giving you the updates, sending you the updates from ourselves. So it's ready there. It's turnkey. You're not relinquishing control of your data. You're not sharing your infrastructure with any other company. You're getting the benefits of tens of millions of dollars of investment without having to build anything up front. And then we have a rev share agreement with all of our providers who launch using Terrestream. And for us, it's a few things. One is, we want to be directly incentivized with your success. We want our success to be directly tied to your success. And so we don't sell it as a SaaS offering. We sell it as transactions of revenue. And what we want is we want it to be to get into sort of like the business and financial fundamentals. We want it to actually be viewed as your single cost of goods sold on your financial statement, which is to say, we want to put all of your downlinking costs in there, all of your processing and bandwidth costs into there. And every time you sell a dollar, the only cost of goods sold on that dollar is the take rate we get from that. And everything else is pure profit. So just automating all of the costs between the data capture in space and it getting to the customer, and making sure that all of those costs are packaged into one single take rate that we pull out of that transaction. And that's just going to do incredible things for driving more profitability for satellite operators. And I still think there are a lot of, most operators still are still naive about how costly their proposed cost structures, particularly on a unit basis, if they try to build everything themselves. And I think you need to look no further than looking at, for example, Planet's financial statements. They just, as of I think last year, finally, after 10 years, have positive gross profit margins. Before that, going public, they had negative gross profit margins. And we're not talking operating profit margins, we're talking gross profit margins. They had negative gross profit margins, meaning that the cost of every dollar of revenue was more than a dollar. It was more, they were spending more on getting a single dollar out to market than they were earning. And that's crazy. And it's because there's a lot of cost involved in getting a a few bits and bytes. This is like the crazy part. Is like you think about, like, we live in the age of the internet, and it's still this expensive to just move bits and bytes around. But there's a
Right.
lot of there's a lot of expense in moving bits and bytes from an onboard computer that's in space through a ground terminal and out to a customer. And because there's
Mm,
humans involved, there's downlinking costs, all of that. And so we want to collapse that from being like, 90 to 100% of your revenue to being like between 10 and 30% of your revenue. That you can build a
mhm,
significantly more profitable, so you can earn 70 cents of every dollar you sell, rather than losing 10 cents on every dollar you sell. And I think there's just, we know, we've seen this because we've dealt with so many satellite operators. We have a really good understanding of the financial fundamentals and how this scales up. And I think a lot of satellite operators who are starting to build their businesses today are naive to this point and don't truly understand the economics, or how their financials will change from what they're projecting once they really get into an operational environment. And so with Terrashoot, it's really about collapsing all those costs into a smaller take rate and giving the satellite operator back more cents, more dollars, for their sales. And while also at the same time, with its integration with EarthCache, ensuring that they can access thousands of customers right off the get-go, right off from the moment they start having commercial data ready and available for usage.
I'm really happy with where we've like kind of taken everything so far, and I think you're of the mind where we'll have some interesting responses here. I want to kind of zoom out and look at why does this story matter, and why should the rest of the world care? Because you know here we are in new space, and anyone in the industry kind of has their head down. We're kind of working on our own thing. We're zoomed in on these pieces of the value chain, right? But like, let's zoom out and I want to ask the broad question. Why should the world care? Um, and I'll give you that opportunity as a jumping off point. And then maybe later, or if you want to start here, you could talk a little bit about the GPS industry as sort of an analogy to what new space is becoming, and especially Earth observation, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna just give you that and see where you take it.
Yeah, certainly. Well, look, I think we bring it back to first principles. At the end of the day, we as a collective planet invest in space technologies primarily to make our planet a better place. And that's why we go to space. That's why we put objects in space. That's why we put assets into space. And I think you can just look back at our history to verify that. I think it's worth wondering. Ask yourself, if you're in the space tech industry, if we did not invest in space technology starting in the 50s and the 60s, would we have discovered the warming of the planet as early as we did? And if we didn't, how much more of a precarious situation would we find ourselves in today had we not invested in space technology so early? You think about the investments. You mentioned the GPS industry. Think about the investments we made into GPS technology, and had we not done that, how much value would we not have in the world today of goods and services because we didn't have that capability? And if you're working in Earth observation today, you should not be satisfied with the size of the market today. You should fundamentally believe that Earth observation can be as valuable, if not more valuable, than any other space technology. And the onus is on us to unlock that value. The way I look at it is every day is a day towards unlocking more and more value in the world and enabling more and more people to benefit from all the investments we're making and putting those assets into space. And so in some respects, I feel like it's a travesty that the market itself is as small as it is. It's about a four to five billion market today. And compared to GPS, which is approaching an $80 billion a year market. And so the onus is on us to unlock that value and make it as valuable and as important to our everyday lives as those other space technologies have become. And it certainly has the potential to be. So if you're working in EO right now, you're on the forefront of that. And it's going to be an exciting next couple of decades as we make this as important to everyone's life as those other space technologies have become.
Awesome. I like that. That's like a great pep talk for the industry right there. I think everyone needs to hear that. Yeah, I love how that sort of frames things, always connecting to that fundamental purpose, right? Which is to create value on Earth, right? So, yeah, I mean, I that gets me out of bed in the morning. So I say, yeah, let's do it.
8 years later, as difficult as it is to work in this industry, it's the thing that still keeps me excited about it. And more excited every single day is knowing that we're unlocking more value every day. And I think that's all one could ask for in terms of how to, we started the day off talking, the conversation off talking about, why I got into space, and, it's really to what it means to live a good life and a productive life. And if you can get up every day and realize you're unlocking massive value in the world and bettering people's lives, then how else would you want to spend your time?
Couldn't agree more. And I think we're not going to get a better sign off than that. It's perfect. So yeah, thank you so much. It's a privilege for me and a real joy. And I think that people who listen will get a lot out of it. So thanks so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure.